Hello and welcome to Robert Gregory Partners Webcast or podcast, depending on how you are listening to us today. Accelerating to back, 3 strategies for driving productivity. In part 1, we talked about this a little bit, but just to refresh you, we're recognizing at RGP, at Franklin Covey, like many of you, that we're all returning back to a variety of scenarios, whether that's back to working on site, continuing to work remotely, new teams, new leaders. Some of us have even completely new and pivoted new strategies. So like in part 1, we're welcoming 2 of our brightest minds, Bob Droblick and Maria Sullivan, to share their thoughts on one of the more critical things that leaders can do as we head back to our given realities. In part 1, we had invaluable conversation around self-awareness. Self-awareness is always an important skill, but even more so as we think about how we're leading our teams differently now, remotely, via video, asynchronously. So it's highly important that we leverage our self-awareness as we head back. The topic of discussion today is focus. How might we ensure that we're working on what's most critical now and that we have our team aligned to those items and the priorities and the strategies that are most important? So Bob, what would you lead off with relative to focus?
Thanks, Greg. What we want to do is to talk about what we see as the most important factor in helping a person to focus and maintain that focus throughout these difficult times. And that is going to be around full engagement. The ability to fully engage in whatever you're working on or whatever you're doing in the moment. It sounds simplistic. It is not. It's difficult to execute. But we want you to think about when you are doing your best work, it is when you are 100% fully engaged in whatever it is you're trying to accomplish. It leads to efficiency. You're going to get more work done more quickly, and you're going to get more work done, and it's going to be a more effective product. But it also applies to your full engagement when you're not working. So when you're outside of work, doing whatever hobbies, hanging out with the family, whatever it is that you might be doing, full engagement is just as important in those areas, but for a couple of different reasons. One, obviously it's important because people will experience you a little differently when you're fully engaged. But second, it helps with energy. It helps with burnout. Because when people get burnout or when they have energy challenges, it's because they are always half in and half out from an engagement standpoint. They're always kind of thinking about things in the back of their mind. And when we can create some discipline around full engagement to say, for this next 30 minutes, this is the only thing that's important, no matter what it is, whether at work or outside of work, then we find both productivity changes and energy changes and anything related to burnout. So full engagement is a really important topic.
Bob, I wanted to highlight how important I think full engagement is, especially now as we're hearing from all of our clients. You mentioned burnout. People seem to be working longer days. Being attached to video all day, every day is tough on everyone. And again, it feels like longer days. The days feel longer even than they are. And I think it's especially important to think about your recommendation of even when we're off work, on outside of work activities, to fully engage there, turn off the work, intentionally tune into 100% fully engage into those other non-work activities that help ease the stress of the longer, tougher days.
So, Greg, absolutely. But the key here to be able to effectively execute that is that when you're on, and when you're off, right? So when you're doing something else, you're doing that fully. When you're working, you're doing that fully. So because the myth of work-life balance has gone away a long time ago. Like that, there's no real balance. We work many hours. We're not going to have, the typical 9 to 5, 8 hours. But the psychological, emotional connection to that is if we are 100% engaged with the amount of hours when we're working and we're 100% engaged with the non-work activities, it eases that off. So what people do here when we are working at home or all these different work is that blends together. And there isn't that cordoned off, that sectioned off, kind of approach. So we just have to begin to enforce discipline around our structures and schedules so that when we're doing one thing, that's what we're doing. And when we're doing something else, that's what we're doing, right? And not this blending, this overlap that ends up draining people in a pretty significant way.
Well, you're absolutely right, Bob. I mean, it's exhausting between trying to manage the corporate initiative around, for instance, getting people back to work or reinvigorating our business model in the new world, right? While simultaneously changing diapers and imagining what we're going to have for dinner while keeping the 7-year-old engaged in whatever the lesson plan from school is. mean, work has just expanded to fill every moment allotted. And so this idea of when you're on, and when you're off, makes good sense. It's going to require setting some boundaries. We know from the VPN data that people's workday in the US has expanded on average 3 hours. And if you imagine the kind of work that we're doing virtually, which requires so much more attentive listening, so much more attentive management of relationships, that it's really difficult to turn it off, to not be, or when you turn it off, to not be exhausted. So I really appreciate this idea of letting go and setting boundaries, saying, I'm not available during that time. The other add to that I would make is don't forget to take your vacation. Just because you're still at home doesn't mean you don't need quality time off. In fact, potentially more so now, given all of distraction that we've been dealing with. I'd like to take a moment to talk about organizational focus as well. The challenge is I hear sometimes with my clients that they're spending a lot of time and effort working on initiatives that felt really valuable in January, but may not even be relevant now. And I think sometimes we do that because it's more comfortable. We presume that the processes or the initiatives or the goals that we set in place at the end of last year in preparation for this year are still the ones we need. I think there's some time that needs to be devoted to thinking about how we should be spending our time differently, how we should be adjusting our business model, what our clients need from us now, and how we can deliver that differently. And then I would encourage people to take that list and whittle it down to 2. Because I know you got 20 ideas about what should be different, but that's not helpful. That's not actually focus. Strategic focus is an idea, perhaps 2, for a 90-day sprint. So let's be really crisp about what kind of goal you should select. I would look for an X factor goal. So some goals are incremental improvements, and those are nice, but the curve on those isn't adequate to get you where you need to go. You want to be thinking about an X factor goal that's going to create a ripple effect, that's going to build exponentially instead of linearly on your progress to date. Sometimes we think about X factors as wildly important goals or WIGs. An X factor goal, an example would be Alcoa. The CEO of Alcoa took the stage during a shareholder meeting, annual shareholder meeting. Forgive me, I don't remember the exact date. And he had just taken over as CEO, and he said, there is only one metric by which we will measure this company, and that is employee safety. Now think about it, Alcoa has molten metal flowing in their plants. They create all manner of metal products, and safety was it. So the analyst in the crowd politely raised their hand and said, but what about return on capital? And he said, safety will be the measure. What about return on investment? Safety will be the measure. What about EBITDA? Safety will be the measure. The analysts practically knocked each other over getting out of the room in order to call to sell their Alcoa. He focused on safety, and he took their safety incidents to 0 over the course of a number of years. It actually became more dangerous to work in a software engineering company or in a service industry than it did to work in a plant with molten metal. And in the course of that time, their return to shareholders was extraordinary. If you'd bought $10,000 worth of stock on that day that he made that announcement, you would have received $1 million in dividend, and your stock purchase would have been worth $37 million in the course of that time. So that's an example of an X factor goal, a single thing that moves the entire organization, that has an exponential or ripple effect that doesn't stop at the incremental nature of what you're trying to do.
So thanks, Dolly, for talking about this organizational focus. The underpinning for being able to effectively execute that focus is going to be a level of emotional discipline that is going to be challenged more so now than in times past. So when we talk about emotional discipline, I want to think about a couple different areas. So number one, I want to think about how easy it is to do things that you like or to do things that are easy. And that's an easy trap to fall into, especially as our energy gets drained, as our tanks are getting a little more empty. We want to get to something, so you're a high level leader and now you want to get down into some details and weeds because that's what you knew and what you liked and what you did maybe a job or two ago, right? Because you like that kind of stuff. We have to have the emotional discipline to say the like and the easy aren't going to dictate what I do and how I focus. And if we continue to manage our emotions and be able to enforce the right type of discipline, then we're able to keep our focus and the team's focus. The challenge is that we are, as Sully has mentioned, the tank is getting drained a lot faster, right? Our fuel mileage is way down, right? Even from the Zoom calls are being shown to take away more energy than in person because we're watching ourselves and we're doing these different things. It feels different, right? So it begins to take away more energy than these other modes. So being aware of where you are emotionally, where you are in terms of your energy, and trying to make sure you're refilling that through the full engagement, making sure we're getting enough sleep, making sure we're exercising, making sure we're eating right. All the things that we all know these things, right? These are not new things, but we have to make sure that we're doing all these things in order to maintain, because it's ultimately going to come out in a lack of focus, right? And it's going to come that we are now adjusting our choices about what we do and focus on based on some emotional need versus the business need. And that's the trap that's easy to fall into in kind of in unprecedented times like we're in.
It sounds right on, Bob. I think an analogy would be if I were in the gym and I were working out, that in the final set, I might cheat on the last few reps, right? Because I'm exhausted and I'm taking shortcuts. I think that organizationally, we have the same challenge, right? To be sure that we're holding the discipline and the rigor and the clarity around our mission in these uncertain times, right? Half of the world wants certainty, the other half wants control. These particular times are designed to ensure that we can't have either. And so there's a psychic exhaustion that comes from that. And we have to be careful not to cheat, not to take the easy route, but to have the same rigor and discipline of both to manage ourselves, but also to manage our businesses.
Yeah, and we don't achieve that through white knuckling it, which is
No.
that you see from a lot of executives. It's just like, I just have to, get the sweat coming down and white knuckle it. It is about self-care, it's about self-awareness. It's about
resilience,
engaging other people, and resilience. And resilience is built. It doesn't appear, and it doesn't, some people have it, some people don't. It is built. And there's some really good models that we've talked about in terms of resilience that, Sully, maybe you can share that help to say, we can build this. It's not it's either here or not there.
So self-care is the most obvious piece of resilience. There's a piece around collaboration. Of course, there's a piece around strategic focus. You may remember we did a webcast, a podcast about resilience. Please feel free to pick that up at robertgregorypartners.com. So it seems that when we think about focus on the individual level, that a lot of that is about energy management, focusing your energy into the places that are most important to you, most important to the organization, and recognizing how to maintain that energy, whether that's through managing your resilience, ensuring that you're demonstrating good self-care and role modeling energetically recharging behaviors for your team members and family. Is that consistent with how you think about energy, Bob?
Yeah, it absolutely is. And the area that I think about a lot in terms of performance and development is, one, on the negative side, is what are the ramifications of the lack of energy? And that relates directly to the lack of focus. If we think about it, we all have our own experiences, right? Where we are, when we are tired at the end of the day, when we are drained because of either illness or we're just not feeling right, we find that the focus is usually the first thing that goes. A close second is sometimes our affect towards others. So it becomes this critical factor in order to be able to execute effectively our focus and where we're heading, to have that energy managed well, to have the energy to keep that focus.
Yeah, we all have an energy signature. We give it off in every interaction. It's easy to tell someone's energetic signature visually and also verbally. So recognize that just because they can't see you doesn't mean they can't hear your attention, your focus, and they are not experiencing your affect. These are all things that come across even when we try an email. So be sure that you're aware of the energy you're giving off.
Exceptionally helpful conversation today, team. Some of the things I heard were, in addition to making sure I'm fully engaged in the moment, whether it's at work or outside of work, I need to be aware of and harness some emotional discipline to be tuned into the things that matter most, not just those that I resonate most with, that I like most, that are easiest. I want to make sure that I'm fully engaged in the moment with my team, with my customers, with my family. Sully brought up a great point of also looking macro here to ensure that as I'm fully engaged in the right thing. So whether I'm in charge of the entire organization, a business unit, a division, or my department, I'm really pausing and being very intentional about considering my objectives or the initiatives that I came into the year on, or that in the first quarter or second quarter, we're revisiting what's most relevant now. In our new, we can choose to see that there's a new world of possibilities. And am I tuned into, am I focused on those that are most critical for the organization, that I can drive the most productivity for and with my team on? So with that, thank you, Bob and Sully, for the valuable insights you've provided and that you always share with us, and for the additional proof of the value of focus, today's topic. Jen, I'd like to ask if you don't mind, our moderator, Jen Morrison, to open us up for some Q&A questions. We would, ask any questions, thoughts, feedback you've got. Please type them in to the comments section or the Q&A section. In the meantime, I do see one from our buddy Mike. Bob, I believe this is directed your way. How do we help our teams with a gut check on their own work to determine if it's critical or if they're actually focused on the easy stuff?
Yeah, so thanks, Greg, and appreciate everyone being on the call today. So let me, I want to back up just a touch on that question, because I think that, there's the gut check on work being critical, but I think even before that, we have to look at what ultimately helps people to stay engaged, focused, and productive, in their work. And I want to break it into two categories, because at most times the simple answers are the best. So number one, in terms of performance with your team and the people that report to you, is that one, they have to know and feel that you care about them. That is always number one. It has been proven numerous times across every study you ever see, is that people have to believe that you have an interest in them, is maybe a more neutral way of saying it, but you are interested in their success. So that's number one. If they feel that, then they are going to have a different level of engagement. Then the second one is a little more straightforward. That's really about, do they know exactly what to do? But the what has some bullet points underneath it, and the what is they not only need to know what, they need to know the priority for all the what's that they have on their agenda, and then they have to understand how exactly, with clarity, am I going to be graded and determine how good something is. We forget sometimes that people, we in all corporate environments, we can understand the difference between an A+ and an F. What high performers and what teams that are really engaged, what they want to know is the difference between a B+ and an A+. And that can be more difficult and more challenging to understand, because there's levels of specificity of what exactly we're looking for, how far you're looking to take something, what type of output we're trying to create, that gets that high performer differentiation between, what's a pretty good job and what's an exceptionally good job. So if we look at this as a chain, we say, okay, that my people feel cared about, I'm interested in them, interested in their success. and then they know what they're working on and the right priorities, and they know not just how they're going to be graded, but what is the differentiation between a good job and a great job, then we feel like we can really, really help teams engage at a completely different level, no matter the environment.
I like how you're phrasing this, Bob, and it reminds me, you know, for those of you that tuned into part one in this 3-part series, we talked a lot about self-awareness. This is really kind of shifting, you know, as you might think it should, to kind of social awareness, but specifically about the folks on my team, and the objective being to drive focus. I wonder if you could go just a step further in what you shared there, Bob, and think about how might we leverage that then now to really encourage my team. Once I've nudged them along to kind of self-evaluate what they're working on, how might I encourage them now to think about that, you know, effort versus impact, and get them working on those things that are most critical right now.
Yeah, so if we want to take into account the virtual environment that most people are in, and you know, as we're seeing timelines, they're probably going to be in to some degree longer than certainly now, and you're seeing plenty of companies push things out even further. So we could say, you know, when we look at this curveball around a virtual environment and relating that to, you know, what you're asking about, we have to remember that, you know, when that Zoom meeting turns off, like they're back in their office, their basement, the corner of their bedroom, and it's silent, right? There is zero opportunity for additional connection outside of those areas, of those you know, Zoom calls or you know, emails and that sort of thing. So we have to recognize that there is a level of connection that you're going to have to intentionally and proactively engage in that's different than other situations, because of the amount of spinning that can happen for folks because of the isolated environment. But even more so, the spinning that gets people off track can happen because, like, we don't know, and most people don't know about what things are going to look like, you know, what our business objectives are going to be, what business is going to look like. There's all this ambiguity that you as a leader aren't going to be able to clarify, but it's the connection that you have between yourself and your teams that are going to help to prevent that lack of clarity from becoming a performance issue. So high levels of connection, intentional connects, and trying to do everything you can to fill in those gaps that used to be water cooler conversations, pop the head in the office, those kind of things. Those have to be done intentionally now. A phrase I use, we can't leave spontaneity to chance in these situations.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. That rehearsed spontaneity doesn't work very well. So intentionality, once again, showing its head, and resilience as well. So thanks for sharing that. I'm appreciating the comments coming in. Leah, thanks for your comment around the energy signature reference. Glad you're seeing that, and that's resonating with you. Bob, I would point you at maybe one more. We have maybe time to finish this one more. Mike asked also, with all the change and ambiguity going on in all markets and teams, how can I help my team be resilient and come together, you know, fighting the moral issue?
Yeah, it's great. That might be morale, might be moral. Either way,
Excuse me. I'm saying, and it's bad. That was a bit of a Freudian slip, thinking about a conversation with a client earlier who they're fighting kind of the moral issue of, you know, my teams don't feel like it's safe yet. You know, the organization is mandating, you know, rounds of us coming in. So yeah, answer with the morale over our team.
That's right. I get the Ron Burgundy moment where you just read whatever's on the prompter. I get it.
Yeah.
So the question is around helping the team be resilient, you know, and come together. So I would put a couple bullet points out there. So number one, I would say you have to, you know, not just talk about what you need to get done, but, you know, talk about the situation and have courageous conversations about, you know, your own, you know, be vulnerable with your own concerns, because everybody knows that no one knows. So it's not like you're going to, as a leader, going to be effective by coming up and saying, you know, we got it all figured out. We know what's going to happen. Just follow me. I'll do it. Right. Nobody expects that, nor is that going to be effective. So I think we have to talk about what's happening in a courageous and vulnerable way so that everyone knows that we're all in the same boat. And then we can say, despite this, or because of this, or in concert with this situation, here's how we need to best support each other and interact, so that we can be successful for our business and we can be successful for each other. But it's this what I would call a deeper level of conversation to get to, let's really talk about how we're feeling about this. Let me talk about how I'm feeling about this. And then once everyone knows where everybody stands at an emotional level, it's a lot easier than to say, okay, we have to take action given and despite and because of what the situation is. So if you haven't had those types of conversations with your group, then I would suggest that you do, and see where you're going to, the focus is not to solve the problem. The focus is to engage in the expression, of all these things that people are going through right now. It's a huge first step.
Fantastic. Thanks for that, Bob. I appreciate it. And just again, for another plug on it, we had a previous webinar that spoke to the topic of resilience, and Sully walked us through a nice model there too. So looks like we're butting up right against time. I want to be respectful of everyone's time, and thank our panelists, Bob, Sully. Appreciate your insights as always. Participants, thank you for taking the time out joining us today. We hope the conversation has been valuable for you. We'd encourage you to join us for part 3 in this 3-part series on accelerating to back. What are some strategies we can all leverage for driving productivity, where we'll talk more about gaining more commitment and getting that discretionary effort through alignment. So join us for the next part to discuss alignment. Have a great day. Thanks so much.